Hey everyone, happy May 4th. It is Monday, and that means for our expert series, we bring back Greg Dickerson. How you doing, Greg?
I am doing great, Michael. How are you?
I'm doing very well. I just saw an article from CoStar that says it's projecting 148 billion, that's with a B, uh, loan defaults in the commercial mortgage-backed securities market over the next couple of years. And I thought what would be great to have you walk through is really how do distressed assets eventually hit the market? Because I don't think the average investor, like me who's playing in residential, really appreciates the length of time between missed first payment and ultimately that asset being sold. And in reality, a lot of these assets get sold before someone like I would see them. But I thought maybe we could walk through all of that. Then maybe we'll break this down into different parts. But maybe first share your experience with, hey, from a first missed payment of an owner operator to ultimately losing that asset. I mean, it's a long process and workouts and, just other things could happen. So maybe we'll start there.
Yeah. That sounds like a good idea. I was looking while you were talking. So the CMBS market in 2019 was $96 billion, $96 billion. So you're talking about 1%, right?
You said 96 billion in 2019?
Yeah, 96 billion. So you're at, what'd you say that article was? 1.67 billion or something?
No, 148 billion. So it's more than 100% of the market.
148 billion.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's interesting because I'm looking right now and it said the domestic private label CMBS issuance totaled 96.7 billion. So that was the issuance last year. So it'd be interesting to know how big the CMBS market is. Okay, here we go. So I'm looking at something else. I don't know how big the CMBS market currently is. That'd be interesting to find out. And maybe while I'm talking.
I'll look it up while you kind of riff on the process.
Yeah, it might be about 500 billion actually. I'm just curious what percentage of the market that represents. So anyway, to answer your question, the way it works is, when a large commercial asset goes into default, that's the beginning of a long process, okay? And it could be, a bankruptcy looming, like some of these shopping malls, some of these retailers, things like that. So the first sign of trouble is, missing payments going into default. And in my area, there were three major shopping malls that had gone into default towards the end of last year, the beginning of this year, before this all started. They were already missing their payments and going into default. So what happens is, the lenders issue that notice of default. You got to catch this thing up, and then that's when the game starts. So it could be a multi-year process before anything really happens. And generally, what's going to happen is, these REITs and investment funds that own these properties have different tiers that they put these properties in. Tier 1, performing, doing good, we're hanging on to them. Tier 2, distressed. Tier 3, we're getting ready to give it back to the lender. So generally what happens is that's the process. Once it starts default, the conversations start, bankruptcy conversations begin, and the asset starts its transfer to a receivership, depending on the situation, and or back to, the loan servicer, lender, whoever provided that funding. So they'll take the asset over and then generally turn it out to the market where the note will get sold or the property will get sold itself. So it's a pretty long, drawn out, complicated process. And depending on the asset, there'll be a number of people waiting in the wings to pick it up, either the debt or the asset itself.
Yeah. So just to answer the question at hand, it looks like, at least by one source, this is by no means vetted, over $800 billion was the CMBS peak. So
yeah, so that's
almost $1 trillion.
Yeah, so that's about 20% of the market.
Yeah, exactly. So, and again, in the article from CoStar, it was really talking about the new issuance. Like they were indicating the last 3 years, obviously shows the most risk, right? They bought at the peak kind of stuff. So back to the timeline, again, right? Like a residential house, right? You miss your payment. Nothing really starts for the first 90 days, right? Phone calls will start, letters will come. After 90 days, they may file something. Then there's probably another 90-day process. So the shortest somebody would lose their residential house is right around 6 months. In the CMBS market, given bigger assets, lots more legal maneuvering, workouts probably are more interesting. or possible. Really, it probably is a year before one of these substantial assets would really go back to the lender in first position. Is that a fair assumption?
Yeah, if it even makes it back. So these are very, very different. They're all non-recourse,
Right.
so it's a matter of transfer of the debt, transfer of the asset. So it's a little bit different. It's not like the lender comes in and takes these things over and goes through all that. It's
Right.
either going to be a bankruptcy process, or it's going to be a deed in lieu transfer process, or somebody comes in and just buys that debt. It gets written down, new owner takes over. So it's a very different process when you're dealing with CMBS.
Yeah, and I was talking to an asset manager on Friday, and it really sounded like the place to be is to be a known buyer of debt,
Mm-hmm.
because people are going to be discounting the debt, and
Yeah.
then basically using that to bring in a new owner. That's pretty common, I would guess.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and generally those are going to avoid any kind of foreclosure process. So, when that debt's purchased, generally everything's going to transfer.
Mm-hmm.
It's just going to be a deed in lieu. The keys are going to be turned over, and the new owners take over. Everybody walks away. Some commercial loans, that are privately held, can be a very different process. So let's say it's a local, regional, national bank, and they're holding the debt, and it hasn't been sold off. It hasn't been securitized. It hasn't become a commercial mortgage-backed security.
Okay.
CMBS, commercial mortgage-backed security. So that's a very different process, where you go into default. The lender then comes in and does do a foreclosure, or they sell the debt, and then the new owner actually does that foreclosure. So on the smaller deals, it's a little bit different, but on the big ones, it's more of just a business transaction, kind of a stock transfer, if you will.
Yeah. The other thing that was interesting, again, CoStar is the source of this information. They kind of tried to put in a estimate of loss of value, which I thought was interesting, because again, these distressed assets. So they were saying the assets that end up being, I don't know what you want to, I'll call it foreclosed, whatever the right answer is, just bad debt, right? Default. They said that they could see a 65% drop in value. This is for apartments. Wow. Compared to a 19% drop if the debt is still being serviced. So a 65% haircut on the debt, man, that's pretty nasty.
Yeah, it is. It is. And, but you're talking big numbers. So in the whole scheme of things, the question is, who owns those assets? Who owns that portfolio? Who owns the debt? And what does that mean relative to the entire portfolio? So if you're in the market and you own a bunch of stocks, and you're aggregated out amongst, a bunch of different equities and things, you might lose some here, but you're winning some there. So it's a portfolio play, in the overall, but that's a huge cut. But again, we're talking, a small portion of the market. The interesting thing you said to me was multifamily was in that. I wouldn't expect multifamily. I wonder what percentage of that total package is multifamily. I expect hospitality, retail, office, but most multifamily properties that I'm aware of and owners are in pretty good shape. Now I haven't heard May numbers yet, but as of April, we're doing real well.
Yeah, again, this is one article, right? I haven't cross-checked it or anything. I'll just read to you. So they found 13,000 loans to be at high risk. But here's what got, again, as a real estate guy, got me interested. 11,000 of the loans were multifamily. So 11,000 of the 13,000 were multifamily. 823 were retail, 732 office, and 718 other. So I don't know what that,
what that
90%. Yeah. What is that?
So in the CMBS market, the multifamily is going to be bridge loans. It's going to be bridge debt. It's going to be those short-term interest-only loans. So, probably what's happening is a lot of those are coming due and they can't refinance for a number of reasons. They either didn't make their mark, or the money's not there to refi. The requirements are different. So that, if you start drilling down into it, that's probably a lot of what that is.
So again, what does that mean? That means if you're equity in one of those deals, it's gone. That's really what that means.
Yeah, potentially, if they can't work that thing out. Yeah. So as an equity investor, just like in stocks, when it's gone, it's gone. When it gets taken over or, split or whatever, a lot of times those equity investors get wiped out.
Yeah. Then the other thing I thought we would talk about, I don't know if you saw it or done any, if you're a Warren Buffett fan, but he had his shareholder meeting on Saturday. Did you see that at all?
Yeah.
So one of the things that I thought he talked about that was interesting to you and I is he actually came out and said that the consumer and business have already changed. And he said that demand for retail and office will go down. And then he went on to
Right.
propose that, that's not all bad. A lot of the mall and office stuff will be repurposed as storage facilities, multifamily, like converted into multifamily living. And I wanted to ask a guy like you is, let's just take a normal strip mall, or like a mall, right? With anchor tenants, right? You got, I don't know, JCPenney's, Macy's, and Sears. That's just the mall that
An
I grew up
indoor,
in.
you were talking about an indoor mall?
Indoor, yeah. And then, yeah. So
Okay.
two big anchor tenants on the end, and then just malls, like little stores, like 2 levels, right? You got like 75 stores on top and 75 stores on bottom. That's the mall. How do you convert that to something else? I mean, do you literally just scrape it and build a new because it has a big square footage, or do you take the configuration and try to chop up the interior? I just don't know how a developer would look at that.
Yeah, that's interesting. And there's a number of case studies with those types of properties out there that even, started happening before all this. So, there's a number of ways, depending on the property, location, condition. The best thing to do is just scrape it and start new, depending on what it is, where it is. We have one in our market that's primed for that. And in fact, I might make a video on that and kind of drive around it, later on today, just because we're discussing it.
Awesome.
Yeah. And that thing is primed to be scraped and redone. Now, it's one story.
Okay.
So if you go into the 2-story, then you have a little bit more opportunity. If you think about like some airports out there that have the mall / residential hotel component to it. So it can be turned into potentially apartments, with common area, to where some of those units upstairs. And I think some places have tried that. Some tried the co-working, put a little co-working space in there, a little bit of residential, senior living. I've heard, people talk about converting them into senior living, where you have the common areas and you have a food court, you have little, the core, pharmacy, retail, maybe some, medical facilities to service that demographic that lives there. So I could see it turning into assisted living facility potentially. The problem you have with a mall is you've got a lot of interior spaces and you can't get any daylight.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make a very good living, situation. I've seen others where they've left a couple of anchors, torn down the mall, and then redeveloped it into an indoor-outdoor lifestyle center with some residential components in there. So I've seen that done to a number of spaces. But I think the problem now is a lot of these anchors are going out.
Yeah.
So, the question is, are these anchors even going to be able to survive? Like your Macy's and your, Pennies that are open in certain areas, and Belk, and, I don't even know who's left anymore after this.
Yeah.
I mean, seriously, it's like, who's going to stay big box?
Yeah, no, it's, this is just capitalism, in my opinion, at its best, right? There's a particular segment of industry, the mall, just genericize it as the mall, that worked for 50 years or 60 years, that doesn't work after this event. And the people that are going to make the money are the people that come in, buy for pennies, and then have a vision of how to use that space or whatnot effectively. It's going to be the great
a lot of areas,
pricing.
I think a lot of areas demolition just makes sense because they're going to be prime properties and prime suburban neighborhoods. And after this event, there's going to be a ton of retail, office type properties available. Now there are a lot of office buildings that are getting redeveloped into apartments. So that makes sense, and senior living in a lot of areas. But a shopping mall doesn't make for a great living space. So it's kind of difficult, and like I said, it depends on who the anchors are and what that property looks like. But yeah, the Warren Buffett thing was interesting. He said, I sold all my airlines. And what happened to the airlines today?
Down 10%, except Southwest, which is down like 6 or 7. Yeah. Going back to that Warren thing. So I guess that makes sense. Your thought on daylight. See, this is why I like talking to my experts, because I just don't know these things. But I guess that makes sense why maybe a big mall might turn into storage, right? Because you don't want daylight in a storage facility.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I could see a case for indoor storage, but my goodness, you'd have to really get that thing for a song, because you got the problem with the mall is you have a lot of common area that just doesn't get used.
Yeah.
So, to reconfigure that space, and it just depends on how the mall is laid out. But yeah, I mean, that could be a good potential use in indoor storage. But, some of these malls are pretty big. Some of them are pretty small. I've seen some college and universities buy them and turn them into campuses.
Yeah.
So it makes great, educational campuses. Conference centers, but who knows what that business is going to look like and when, so it's really interesting, to try to repurpose a building like that. It just,
Yeah,
like you said, a lot of it depends on how it's constructed.
yeah, I guess it just because again, a lot of these were built 40 years ago, and they're probably not up to
Mhm.
current code, right? It wouldn't pass code today, but it was grandfathered in, and it probably was built for retail code and not single family or residential code. So, I mean, you're probably right. I mean, I guess it would be cheaper just to knock it all down and build a new versus try to retrofit, this old square box into
Yeah.
something else.
Especially storage. When you look at the dollars that you'd have to pay for the building for what you could get a storage facility or build one for, that's going to be very difficult to make work, for a traditional shopping mall, unless, you can get the thing, for pennies on the dollar. I mean, you're only talking about, hundreds of thousands of square feet, in terms of the building itself. And then to convert that to storage, it'd have to be a pretty good deal.
Yeah. So I guess in short, there's probably lots of malls out there. I can think of 3 or 4 in my area that won't be there in 5 years. That will be just something else.
Yeah. Now I'll tell you a fantastic use, but again, it would be hard to make it work. Would be like an indoor multi-sports complex. You just gut the sucker, leave the exterior walls. If you got a high ceiling, man, you got a roller rink, you got, indoor sports, you got, trampoline park. I mean, you could do a number of things, but that would be hard to make that work too.
Oh, I like that thinking though, because again, I think something that's going to be important. Because again, I think just like the Great Depression, consumer behavior is going to change after this event. The Great Recession didn't really change. .com crash didn't change. 9/11 didn't really change. I think this is going to change behavior, and one of them is going to be about experiences. And oh, by the way, local experiences. So having a place, indoor soccer, trampolines, skydiving, and
rock climbing, ninja course, all that. Yeah, indoor wave pool.
Yeah, that could be cool. That could be fun. All right.
Yeah. But like you said, who knows what all that's going to look like? I mean, what we see now is the areas today. A lot of areas are opening up. This is May 4th, 2020. So whoever's watching, listening, wherever, whatever, we're still in the middle of a lot. My state has still not released our shelter stay-at-home order. Mm-hmm. We had that till June 10th initially.
Jeez.
Well, we were one of the last ones.
Oh, that's
we were
true.
one of the last ones going in. So, we've only been at it since the middle to third week of March, I think, is when it started. Yeah. It might have been that last week of March when we were actually ordered to stay at home. So we're only about 5-6 weeks in. Anyways, so we're seeing a lot of the country open up, and you're seeing a lot of people go out and gather, like at the beaches and the parks and, things like that. And they're starting to visit the malls, and, some people are going into restaurants, but, the real question is who's going to travel, who's going to fly, who's going to go back to hotels, who's going to go to a conference if you can even hold one. Yeah. Some people will, some won't. It's hard to say what the traffic's going to look like. And then, the big question is, are we going to see another flare up, which arguably we should, based on the behavior we're seeing now for the country or the states that are opening up. Yeah. And the density of the, just protests and stuff. You would think we'll see another reflash.
Yeah. Well, let's hope this thing dies in the summer and we never see it again. I realize that's a hope and not a very likely, but hey, let's put it out there. Let's just put it out there.
Yeah, the sun's just going to make it go away.
Yeah, go away. It's 80 degrees. It dies.
I think Brazil can argue against that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I saw those numbers. Some horrible stuff going on in
and
Brazil.
It's hot in Brazil.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. So the other thing that I think we should be talking about is I see this, this being solved with people like you, your history, right? Being an entrepreneur. I think we are about to enter the greatest decade of entrepreneurship ever, because we're going to have the great repricing of stuff. Leases will be lower, potentially hiring people will be different. Creativity will be there. What could you tell someone? Because again, I think being an entrepreneur coming out of this is going to be pretty tremendous. What are your thoughts on that?
So I talked last time about co-tenancy. So co-tenancy is huge. If you've got a lease in a shopping center, or there is a shopping center, and if a certain number of those units go dark, let's say 20-30% of the units are dark, then that should trigger a co-tenancy clause in your lease where you can cancel your lease and or go month to month and or renegotiate and reduce your rent. So I think with the unfortunately, there are some businesses that aren't going to be able to reopen. Mm-hmm. That will give the opportunity to renegotiate some things. So if you're a business owner out there and you're struggling and you're on the fence, renegotiate with your landlord and turn it into a percentage rent lease. So maybe you turn it to where you pay a percentage of your gross sales moving forward after a point, because they would rather have somebody in there thriving than versus going dark. And you're not going to have a whole lot of people, lined up to replace you, because everybody that wants to start a business right now is going to wait, and see what happens, because there will be some deals out there. So I would not go into a long-term lease. I would not guarantee a lease. That's what's going to change in the commercial retail market moving forward. I think you can negotiate away lease guarantees. You can go, month to month. You can do percentage rent deals. Landlords would rather have somebody in there growing, thriving as a future, being able to pay rent. The tables where a lot of these centers, the developers and the landlords, I'm a developer, we're squeezing so much out of the tenants between charging premium rents and a percentage of their gross, on top of that. It was just really, really killing a lot of people. So I think now that tide's going to turn, where it's going to finally come back into the favor of business owners and entrepreneurs. So from a number of ways, from a brick and mortar standpoint, it is a great time if you've got something that, nothing's going to weather a storm when you get shut down. So let's say we get through this, we get open, we got vaccines and we got treatments. We don't have to worry about being shut down again. Then the question is, how are you going to fight against Amazon, the online retailers? You want to be the type of business that's going to survive all this, and you got to be able to market yourself so that you can drive those customers into your store. And if you were put out of business, you had a skill. You had something people were coming in for. So if you were some sort of professional service or something like that, you should be able to leverage that online and transition that skill from an entrepreneurial standpoint. And there's a huge need out there for, what does every business need? Every business needs customers. So if you've got some social media skills, you could set up an agency where you do social media to drive customers through Facebook ads, YouTube ads, in technology. There's a huge opportunity to step into that space and drive traffic to people, doctors, lawyers. As we get reopened, these businesses are going to need customers. So, there's an opportunity there. There's an opportunity for other, ancillary contractor work supporting some of these other businesses that are reopening and surviving through logistics, shipping, delivery, just copywriting, sales, just all kinds of different things that you can do. So yeah, there's going to be some opportunities.
Yeah, man. I think this is a lot of fun. I think there's a lot of hope and value coming down the line. We do got to get through this event, which will be months in duration and a blip on the radar. It'll hurt. There's no question it'll hurt. But I look forward to what is coming. Any kind of closing thoughts if we wrap up this conversation?
Yeah. So I think, in general, the real estate market, the housing market is strong. I'm still seeing strong demand, low inventory. It's still a seller's market, in most areas of the country. There's obviously pockets here and there, but in most areas, that's still remaining strong. So I think it's, it's a good time to be a seller in the single family residential world. On the multifamily side, debt and lending is getting more and more difficult. It's going to be very important. Number one, they're really looking at the experience of the operator when you go to borrow a loan now. They want to see experience, especially the agency lenders, reserve requirements, lending criteria, loan to values, loan to cost, all those types of things are changing still today. They came out now where once you apply for your loan, they're going to want to see, T12, T3, and T1. Okay. They've never asked for a T1. Now they're asking for that. Yep. So as you go through the pipeline and you get your loan approval and your commitment letter and your term sheet, they're going to want to revisit that, and they're going to be looking for a T to date. So they're going to be looking at, I called it T yesterday, the other day. So they want to know, let's say you've applied for the loan last month and you're going to close the end of this month. Sometime before you get your loan commitment, they're going to want to revisit that occupancy and those collections, and they're going to want you to submit a T, year to date on that, week to date, month to date, whatever, just to kind of verify that, collections are still there and the income is still there. So it's getting more and more difficult, and that loan can be pulled at any minute along the pipeline, even after they commit, even after they've given you a term sheet and committal, they can still pull that thing out from under you. So be careful, what you're putting at risk in terms of earnest money. Make sure you've got the ability, if your loan gets pulled, you get all your money back and walk away.
Yeah. Very cool, man. Well, I appreciate you doing this every Monday for us. I love this expert series. You always answer my questions with so much wisdom and help. So I appreciate you, man. Thank you, Greg.
Yeah. Enjoyed it. Good to see you.